So I'm going to talk about how you win the election. And in fact, I'm going to talk about how you win roughly 1,500 elections. Specifically, I want to talk about the election on the 26th of May 2019, which I'm sure is the one that we're all looking forward to the most. Partly because the election on the 25th of May 2014, a lot of the work has already been done. A lot of the views are already set. A lot of the opinions that citizens have of you are already known. So what you really need to be thinking about is not just how you win the election on the 26th of May 2019, but how you win the election of October the 18th, 2013, and the election that happens every single day between then and 2019. So let me say first that I've heard lots and lots of great stories about what's been going on. I was asked to try and summarise some of the things that we heard over the course of the couple of days, and there were some fantastic examples of people who are reaching out to citizens and who are involving people in discussions. My favourite one, I have to say, was, and this is very bad of me for forgetting the person's name, my favourite one was the people who were asked to do a project on institutional innovation for discussion among the under 40s, because I'm sure you know, being down the pub of Saturday night, they talk about little else than European institutional innovation. So they decided that it was best to flip it to why do the European institutions never listen to us, which is a brilliant bit of jiu-jitsu on the question, and comes up with some much more useful answers. So there were lots and lots of little projects that I thought were great examples of what you could do, and I tweeted lots of them as I was going through. But it does feel a bit like, for all we've scored a few goals, we're still 5-3 down. We are still not winning the match. And one of the reasons that we're not winning the match is that public communications, particularly for something as big and as multi-headed as Europe, is a conversation that's taking place between multiple people on multiple fronts that you can't always see. And the interaction that people have with Europe, as a citizen, maybe you only have an interaction with Europe once every 2 or 3 years. And if that's a bad one, then that's going to colour all of the things that you then think about Europe for the rest of that time. So my point about there being an election every day is not just that, political decisions are taken and opinions are formed every day, which is true. It's more that everything that the European institutions are doing and the ways in which they're communicating with the public can be wins and can be losses. And I think there are a lot of losses out there, and I want to talk about 3 in particular. The first loss is when you answer a question about freedom, democracy, liberty with, well, mobile roaming for tariffs. I personally think that low mobile roaming tariffs are great, but they aren't about freedom, democracy and liberty. It's a bit like, and hence the picture, taking a tennis racket out to play cricket with. It's a good instrument, it's a good answer, but it's the wrong sport. The second problem that I see is jargon. I know it's really easy to say, oh, plain language. But one of the things that I noticed in the conversations and that we've had here and in looking through some of the documents that were on the tables out there is that it's very, very easy to slip into just using occasional jargon words. And it's a bit like cigarettes, right? The one's not going to hurt you probably, it's not grape, it's not going to hurt. But actually, because they're habit forming and because it's not just one, it's 20 a day for 30 years, that's what kills you. And so if you think of sustainability and stakeholders when you read them in a document as like smoking a cigarette, that's the kind of impact that it has longer term in the way in which people understand the European institutions and the way in which you speak to them. Third, and I know this is a difficult one to get around, is that lots of people, national governments, mobile phone companies even, awfully, they take credit for what the European institutions do. And that isn't unsurprising. There's a saying in English that success has many fathers and failure is an orphan. But I don't think we're successful enough as the European institutions in pushing our fatherhood. We need to be using not big multimedia campaigns or television expenses, but cleverer messages to try and understand what it is that Europe is doing and what it is that is making connections between Europe and the people. And so I'm not saying that those things are all wrong. I'm not saying they're going wrong everywhere. There's been some good examples that have tried to address these that we've heard about over the course of the last 2 days. But I do think that these are 3 of the areas where you can just build up the defence and where you can stop the extra goals against going in. So one of the things that really struck me listening to a session earlier was the vision and values is shared very widely around the room, but it's shared in a kind of almost British way of, not really wanting to talk about it and being kind of embarrassed, when people talk about European values. There's a George Orwell said that there's a frozen horror that comes over Englishmen when someone says the word God. And it feels a bit like there's a frozen horror that comes over many people in this room when people talk about values and vision. There was a session, I can't remember who it was who spoke, but someone from the floor said, I feel very lucky to live in Europe. And people laughed. Well, I feel very lucky to live in Europe, right? Kylie wasn't born in Europe. I was. It's fantastic. But I think the broader question there is, if you aren't feeling like you need, like, being lucky to live in Europe is a valid sentiment, if it seems naive to you, then you're thinking about the wrong things. It is important to try and get across that Europe has vision and values, and more to the point, a set of successes and a set of things that we take for granted that we don't want to lose. And certainly I feel, again, being a Brit, you kind of see this a bit more closely. I feel there are all sorts of things that we would lose by resiling on some elements or going backwards on some elements of what we've achieved. And so for me, I think the vision and values part is really important, and you ought not to be embarrassed about pushing those kind of messages forward and not to feel like it's cheesy or it's gauche or it's, just not appropriate in some way. It's absolutely essential. So, I want to talk about how you can win. And I think there are 3 ways that Europe wins. Well, you can start by not exceeding a profile storage space. That's really important. The first way you can win is by becoming a piece of furniture. Yeah, by not becoming the thing that people argue about, but by becoming the space that people argue in. So it's not about pro-Europeans and anti-Europeans at the parliamentary elections in 2019. It's about different visions of what you do in Europe and what we do at the European level in 2019. It's not, do we get an armchair? It's, where do we put the armchair? And that's the first conceptual shift. That if it can be achieved, if Europe becomes just a level at which politics happens, rather than a big ideological campaign one way or another, then that's a win. And the way that you get to that win is by creating a networked politics, a politics that acknowledges the different levels, subsidiarity, sorry for the jargon word, the subsidiarity and the different levels that exist in European politics, and by working with them more flexibly. The second way you win is by not cramming. Now, this is one of those moments where I feel like I have no right to criticise, because I cram all the time. I wrote this in the pub, in the Kitty O'Shea's last night, and I did the slides at the back earlier on. So, guilty. But it does feel like when people are doing engagement work, particularly before elections, it is like the student who's desperately trying to get facts into their brain the morning before the exam with their kind of tomato juice in front of them. It's not okay to start wanting citizens to engage with you even 12 months before the election. It's essential to have citizens engaging with you the day after the last election and right the way through. So don't cram. Make sure that you're building a consistent story and a consistent route of engagement, rather than just one thing around the election. The other win is trust. Now, everyone has been saying, this is a real common theme from the sessions, you have to try to build trust. Now, I don't know how you build trust in a simple project plan. I don't think you can. I don't think you can have a European trust strategy. I think you have a lot of European trust actions, because one of the ways in which you trust people is by knowing that when you interact with them, they'll be pretty much the same person that they always were, that they will act in a way that gives you faith that they'll be honest about it. And that's the thing, going back to the election every day, that is the thing that is all about consistency of action and consistency of knowing that if the European institutions are saying this and doing this one day, they're going to be saying this and doing this the next day, and that if they're changing it, then I'll know why. So that's one of the ways that you build trust, but you can't do it with a plan. You have to do it by repeated action. Now, my quotes up here are from one of the sessions this morning on storytelling, and I wrote down the name because I thought it would be extremely rude to use the slide without quoting the name. It's Isabel Godel-Ehrhardt, who talked about the 3 treasures of storytelling, right? So I thought these were brilliant. First, focus on meaning and not on information, right? So outside in the bit where you had lunch, there was a 250-page style guide. My first rule in any style guide is don't have a 250-page one. Yeah, so focus on meaning, not on information. Second, open up and be vulnerable. This is a real problem with government. I used to be a civil servant in the UK where it's just as bad. You automatically try to defend what you're doing because you know that you're doing it for more or less the right reasons. And yeah, there might be a few bad consequences, but basically you're good-hearted. So you defend, and you defend, and you defend, and you defend. And actually, opening up and being vulnerable is a much better way of building trust. And the third is understanding how and when to use emotion, rather than always being the data, the statistics, the bureaucrat. Those are all three really important points, but I felt they were a bit wordy, if I'm absolutely honest. So I thought it was probably better to describe them as act, by making all of the information that you are putting out into the world a little bit lighter and a little bit easier to engage with every day, and by remembering that the citizens that you're talking to have 10 minutes a year to engage with Europe, not 2 hours a day. React, and this is a shot from inside one of the discussion sessions yesterday, react by opening up and involving yourself in conversations in shared spaces that you don't control about what you are doing as European officials or as European agencies, and make sure that you look for the impact. And the impact has to be the impact on people on the ground in places like this in Spain, on Greek islands, in villages in Scotland, rather than the impact on national governments. You know, I would be a rich man if I had £1 for every time a government agency said, "I feel your pain, because I understand that GVA is down by 0.5% on a year-on-year basis against long-term trend. I feel that pain." You have to try to engage with people as human beings, but you can't do that as, you know, however many European civil servants there are, you know, 50,000 say. You can't do that as 50,000 people in a continent of 500 million. You have to build up the broader networked involving conversations and make sure that you are finding the people who you need to reach in the most efficient way possible. So I don't think that you can do all of that by 2014. You can't do it by the 25th of May 2014. You've got a chance at doing it by the 26th of May 2019, but at least by 2014 you can start to build the foundations. Thank you very much.